Azul DevRel Espresso, brewed for Java minds.
Hello and welcome to another little video about, this time it's about handling different OpenJDK versions on your machine. So builds of OpenJDK, right? Because I found out that this is sometimes quite useful if you don't rely on third-party tools. So my name is Gerrit Grunwald. I'm working for Azul as the Senior Developer Advocate, also leading the Java user group in Münster. And as already mentioned, today it's all about how to handle multiple builds of OpenJDK on your machine manually. So first of all, if you would like to do it, you can also use third-party tools that are especially made for these kind of things, or that can do it in addition to other stuff. And one of the most popular ones is probably sdkman. You can download it when you scan this QR code. And this can do way more things than just doing builds of OpenJDK, right? It can handle different versions of programming languages, of frameworks, or whatever you like. It puts all the stuff in a specific folder. It adds a specific command to your shell so that you can execute it, which is quite convenient. But as I said, I'm not this kind of guy. But this is not the only tool. There are others. If you're on Mac, you probably know Brew or Homebrew, very similar to sdkman. This is a package manager for all kinds of stuff. It's not only for builds of OpenJDK, it can be used for applications, for frameworks, for libraries, whatever you like. But as already mentioned, it can also handle multiple versions of OpenJDK on your machine. So you can use this tool to install the stuff and handle it, which is nice. But again, not really for me. And that's not all, because we also have Nix. Nix is a tool which also works on Linux and Mac, as sdkman does. Homebrew is only for Mac. Nix is another package manager. Some people like it, so I mention it here so you can get it there. Setting it up on Mac is a little bit more tricky than doing that on Linux, but still possible and you can use it. And with this, you can also handle different builds of OpenJDK on your machine. As you already saw, we cover Mac and Linux quite well with all these tools. Windows, not so much. So there is one tool that is specifically made to handle or manage different builds of OpenJDK, which is Java. It's written in Java. It's available for free on GitHub, as all the other tools are free. You can get it here. It runs on Windows, Linux, and Mac, so you can use that to handle different builds of OpenJDK on your machine. And at least there's one only Windows version of a tool, which is Chocolatey, which is also very much the same as all the others. So it can handle different or manage different builds of OpenJDK on your machine. Manage means it can download new builds of OpenJDK. It can download and install updates of OpenJDK. And for most of the tools, you can switch between different versions of OpenJDK. Well, so this is all cool, but as I already said, I'm more the kind of person that likes to have total control on my machine. So that means I would like to be in charge of updating JDKs. I would like to know where they are and copy the stuff manually in that folder. So I just like to have control over my machine. So the question is, how can you handle multiple JDKs on your machine manually, right? Without using third-party tools, because I don't like to rely on some third-party tools. I never know where they install stuff, and that might change over time and all these kind of things. So, but that's probably just me. But I thought it might be useful to give you an idea how I do it, and maybe you are like me and then you would like to know how to set it up. And we will go through this little procedure. So it's pretty simple. First of all, we download a JDK. Right, then we unpack and rename the folder, and I will explain why the renaming is needed. Then we set Java home, and then we add some aliases to some shell initialization files. And this is the whole thing. Not really a lot to cover, but quite useful. So first of all, in this video or example, we just download JDK 21 and JDK 22 to have two different versions where we can change between them. So you can go to the Azul download page and download Zulu. This is the link to follow, and you just select JDK 21 and JDK 22, download it to your machine. In this case, I will download it on my Mac, so it will end up in the downloads folder. And I download the tar version. If you're on Windows, you can download a zip or whatever. So you just choose the two JDKs and download it from the Azul page. And then we have to unpack it. So this might be different. I use tar, so that means I have to untar it. So I go to the downloads folder, I do an ls-lh, so I see, okay, there is the JDK21 version, and then I untar it with this command. So I use zxvf, untar, and without any other options, it will create a folder with the same name. And then if we do an ls again, we see this is now untarred in this folder, and you see the folder has the same name except the file ending. And now what we do is we rename this folder to a new name, and we give it the name JDK Zulu-21.jdk. So this is now the new name of the folder. And there's a reason why I do that, and I will explain that in a minute. Once we did that, so we download it, we untar, we rename the folder to the new one, and then we see now the new folder is Zulu-21.jdk. So this is where I save my JDK21. And now we do exactly the same thing for JDK22. So I downloaded the tar file, I do a little ls, so I see, okay, it's there. So I untar it, it gets into this folder that has this specific name, and then I rename this one to Zulu-22.jdk. So I have now two folders in my download folder, which is one is Zulu-21.jdk and Zulu-22.jdk. And now you see here it is. And now let me tell you why I rename them to these more simple names. The only reason why I do that is if we think about the next update, for example, 2104, then I will do the same procedure that I did now. So I download the tar file, I untar it, and then I rename the folder again to Zulu-21.jdk, and I simply overwrite the existing one. And the reason why I do that is that I love to stay always on the latest update, which is a good idea for security reasons. And this is way easier, right? If I just overwrite the old folder, then I don't have to change any path anywhere, because every path points to Zulu-21.jdk. So if I just overwrite the folder, all the paths are still correct and no problem at all. This is only different if you have to test your application against different versions of, let's say, JDK21. So JDK 2101, JDK 2102, and JDK 2103. And if you need all these versions on your machine, then it makes sense to keep these folders with their names. But if you really always would like to stay on the latest version, then this is the way easier way to do it, because this also avoids having lots of different JDK versions on your machine that you don't use, because usually you should stay to the latest update, right? So this is the way I do it. And then I don't have to change anything else in the future, because the path always points to that one folder. So that's the main reason for the renaming. Okay, once we did that, the next step would be setting Java home. So the reason for this is we set the Java home folder so that, or binary, the Java binary can be found. So for this one, for each of these shells, and this video is mainly for Linux and Mac, if you're on Windows, you have to use the Windows Linux subsystem to do that, to use, for example, Ubuntu or Debian or whatever. And then you can use the same stuff. But in the PowerShell itself, it's a little bit different. So this is not for plain Windows users, except they use the Windows Linux subsystem. And for that, you have to use the WSL command in the PowerShell to use, for example, Ubuntu on Windows. And then you can use exactly the same stuff. Otherwise, to be honest, I don't even know how to do it in PowerShell. So this is something for the Windows gurus, but not for me. You will find, depending on the Windows version and the shell version, on the Linux version and the shell version that you use, you will find different files that you might have to change. So for me on Mac, it's .bash_profile. This is for the default terminal. If I use, for example, Z shell, which I also use, then it would be .zshrc. And then there are also files like .profile or .bashrc, which is usually the stuff that you have to use on Linux. So on Ubuntu, for example, I always have to modify the file .bashrc. And this is per each user, it's different, right? So if you log in with a different user, you have to change it for that user. And that means if you start up your shell, it will go through that file and will execute or apply all the settings from that file to the shell window. And this is the reason why we have to set the Java home in there. So I use Nano here as an editor to edit the file, but you can use whatever editor you have to edit these files. And the first thing that I do is I export Java home, which is the environment variable Java home, and I set it to this path. In this case, it is the Zulu -21 version. You see, it looks a little bit strange on my machine, and the reason for that is that for Mac, it's a little bit different folder structure than on Linux and Windows. So on a Windows machine, for example, on a Linux machine, it will be probably Zulu -21.jdk / or / and then bin for the Java file. It's in the bin folder. But here it's like in the contents home bin. So on Mac, it's a little bit different folder structure. So don't be surprised that it looks different than on your machine. But you point it in principle to the parent folder of the bin folder. This is the way you do it. And what I do here is I set the default Java home. So that means when I start the shell in the future and type in Java -version, it will give me the Java version in this folder, which is JDK21 in this case. Okay, so once I did that, that's fine. So now I have to add the Java home to the path variable. The path variable is an environment variable where the operating system will look up, or the shell will look up every command that you type in. It should be in one of the folders that is defined in the path variable. So we have to add Java home to path. And you see I add the /bin because the Java command is in the bin folder, right? So this is how you do it. So the only difference on a Linux machine is that you have to export the Java home to a different folder than on the Mac. Okay, once we did that, that means if I now start a shell, it will always find Java in the Zulu -21.jdk folder. That's fine, so I can start it, I can run Java -version, that would be good. But how to switch now between JDK22 and JDK21? So a trick to do that is using aliases. This is something that is available on Linux and Mac systems, for example, in the shell. And you have to think about something like a shortcut, right? So you can type in, you can define a shortcut, and then if you type it in, it will execute a list of commands, for example, on the shell. And then you don't have to type in all this stuff every time. You just can type in the shortcut, and this is in principle what an alias is. So now we define in the same file, for me again, it's the .bash_profile, I have to add the aliases here. So the first thing that I do is add an alias for the JDK21 version, and to be able to use the procedure that I would like to use, I have to add a function first to this file. And the function is remove from path. And the name already tells you what it does. So it removes a specific variable from the path variable, right? This is the idea. Why would I do that, right? Remember, I set the Java home to the path variable. That means Java home is always 21. If I would like to change to Java, for example, to Zulu 22 in this case, I have to remove or somehow change the Java home in the path variable. The idea is remove the old Java home from the path and then add a new one. This is how you do the exchange. So I have to have this function, and then I create the first alias for JDK21. The command that I would like to use later on in the shell is Java21. And you see alias space and then Java21 equals 2, and then you see the whole thing that I would like to do. I remove the existing Java home, right, from the path, and then I set a new Java home and add it to the path. So in this case, I add again Zulu21 because this is the alias for Java21. Okay, fine. And then I do the exact same thing for JDK22, and so that means I create another alias, and this time it is Java22, and I point this one to the Zulu -22.jdk folder instead, right? So I remove the old one, which is JDK21, and I replace it with the new one, which is JDK22. So in principle, what I do is I only switch between, by typing in, I remove the old Java home from the path and set a new Java home. That's the whole thing, right? And it's pretty simple because you just have to do that once for each JDK. And again, the good thing is, even if there's a new update, as you can see, I don't have to change anything here because it's always in Zulu-21 and Zulu-22.jdk. And whatever you have, you can name it JDK21, JDK22, the folder. But if you keep the folder name simple and then with the next update, just overwrite the existing folder, you never have to change that again, except you would like to get rid of one of these Java versions. And if there are new Java versions, you just add Java 23, Java 24, and so on and so on. And you can keep them. And then you can switch between them. So this is in principle all you have to do. Once you save that file, you have to close the shell. And the next time you open it, you can have some fun, right? So for this time, for example, I just type in Java -version directly after the shell opened. And what you will see is it will default to JDK21 because that is the first export Java home that I did, and I add that to the path. So that's fine. So now if I type in, for example, Java 22, this is the alias. It will be remove the old path, the old Java home from the path, and will add a new one. So if I now type in Java -version, you see I get JDK 2201 as the current Java version. So now I can go again and do Java 21 again, and then it will switch back to JDK 21. So this is in principle all you have to do. You have to change one file, and then you can toggle between different JDK versions on your shell. And for me, it's pretty handy to do that. If you're more a guy that depend on some third-party tools, you can use sdkman or whatever. But for me, this works and I love it. So I hope you enjoyed it, and with this, I would say that's it for today. See you next time.